Here's the story about how I rebuilt my very first commander and 3 lessons that I've learned since starting the game of Magic. So, it's 2022 and I had just recently played my first ever commander game at my LGS. My best friend at the time lended me a deck and allowed me to play a game of Commander just to test it out. See what the game was all about, you know? The funny thing is, I actually won that Commander game. I had no idea what was going on, I didn't know anything about the game, but they told me the rules, they told me about all the different phases and steps, and I was able to kind of put together a win from there. Now, of course, since I was a newer player, they kind of gave me the game, but I still had fun nonetheless. And so I was hooked, and I decided to go to my local Target and get myself a commander deck. Now, the first commander I actually saw was Strefan, Mara Progenitor. Strefan is a 4-mana Rakdos commander with flying that gives you some blood tokens and allows you to cheat out other vampires. As a precon itself, it wasn't too bad, but of course, it's a creature-based aggro deck, and with a format riddled with board wipes, it wasn't very good. So I followed the normal path that most EDH players do, and I looked up an upgrade guide. I think I saw 2 different videos, one with a $100 upgrade budget and one with a $300 upgrade budget. Of course, I went with the $100 version. From there, I bought some of the cards necessary, and the deck really started to come together. Now, was it good? By any means, not really. It was still the kind of deck that it wasn't consistent in the early game with the ramp that was provided. If you ever got board wiped, you kind of were shut down for the rest of the game, and due to a lack of actual interaction or removal against higher power pods, it really didn't do too much. After about 6 months of actually owning the deck and playing the deck, I decided to take it apart as my interests were in different avenues at that point. I started really enjoying green, and I really started enjoying white as well. So I started moving into those directions instead. I actually took a very long break from this commander. I wasn't a huge fan of Rakdos, and as I got better and better at the game and learned more and more about the game, I really kind of honed in my style. I fell in love with color combos like Naya and commanders like Jetmir, and green slowly became my favorite color. Now, fast forward till about a couple months ago, and there's this little feeling inside of me. I start to really kind of want to bring back the old commanders that I had. My second ever deck was a Marin Clan Toth list, and I got some interest in rebuilding that. My third ever deck was a mono black braids list, and you know what happened with that mono black deck. And then there was just a feeling inside of me. I needed to get the gang back together. The only thing is that it still kind of just felt like Strefan was always going to be a clunky Rakdos aggro deck with some decent vampire synergies, but again, if you got board wiped, it was kind of over. But like I said, there's 3 things that I've learned since rebuilding him, as well as just things I've learned as a Magic player that will help me make this deck a lot better. And of course, I have a much bigger budget since I've been playing for quite a while now, and I wanted to go all out on bringing my first ever commander back. So I went onto Moxfield and I started building. The first build that I tried was trying to use the first ability of Strefan to the best of its ability. I wanted to make an artifact-based Rakdos deck, while just having Strefan be a value engine. That ended up not being so good. There's only so many ways to ping your opponents over and over again. There's only so many ways that you can actually pay off from these blood tokens. And while you could make it, there were so many other Rakdos commanders that just were much better at doing stuff like this. So after quite a few builds, I really decided to just kind of can this idea and set it aside. Maybe one day I'll be a much better deck builder and I can make something like that work. But for right now, I decided to stray away from that. The next path I thought I would take was a Strefan Dragon's Approach list. Now this one still used Strefan as more of a value engine, trying to get me some blood tokens. And since the blood tokens allow you to discard cards, you're able to put a lot of Dragon's Approach effects into the graveyard so that when you actually play the Dragon's Approach, you immediately get the payoff you're looking for. Then you just search up for a couple of the dragons that you love, and it's really just a group slug burn deck from there. Twin Flame Tyrant was one of the coolest cards that had just recently come out that I put in the deck, and it's not terrible. I've never actually played it in person, only test hands, but it seems like it could have some legs. But even then, I decided to just can the idea as well. I really kind of truly wanted to make a vampire aggro Rakdos deck work, and I think Strefan could be the engine that can do that. So I decided I've made enough decks in the past, and I've made enough aggro decks in the past that I can find a way to make this work. And that's what I did. An entire list of vampires and card advantage and lots of ramp with some ways of protecting, lots of interaction into it, and really just a pretty dang good aggro vampires list. If you'd like to check the list out, it's in the Moxfield link below, and if you'd like to try it out as well, you can buy it with the TCG player link down below as well. So what were the lessons that I actually truly learned from making this commander once again? The first lesson I learned is how to truly play an aggro list. In a lot of my aggro decks, I have ways of cheating out some pretty crazy creatures. Whether that's through a ton of tokens from Othari, really big 6/3 skeletons with something like Gut, or an overrun in the command zone with something like Jetmir. But of course, you're not always going to have access to things like this. And also, those had access to white, which allows me to protect my board state when the inevitable board wipe comes. So what I decided to invest in, since I didn't have access to actual protection for my board, was a lot of life gain. Ways to grind out the game and make sure my life total stayed pretty healthy, because just in case a board wipe were to come out, I would still be able to have a pretty decent life total that can help get me back into the game. I also made sure to not skimp out on the budget and not skimp out on the card quality when it came to the actual vampires I chose to use as attackers. I have 14 really good creatures that allow me to really aggro out the game. They're either great attackers, they help get more damage on the battlefield, some lord effects are available too, and they're just really good vampires that go into the deck. Then of course I have a ton of ways of gaining life, whether it's enchantments or creatures themselves with lifelink. Having a lot of great attacking creatures, ways to keep my life total healthy, lots of ways to recur and draw through my deck really allow me to keep a pretty healthy strategy. So the first lesson was that I learned to build a pretty flexible deck that really doesn't have any dead cards in it. The second lesson I learned was actually related to the gameplay itself. Turns out, just because you have a bunch of mana does not mean you need to dump your hand onto the battlefield. With a deck like this, because you're going to be cheating out vampires anyways, giving them indestructible, and having other ways to buff them up, you kind of want to just rely on Strefan's second ability and use your mana on other things you might need. This could be some support pieces that help you gain life, this could be some draw engines that you might want, or it could be maybe a supportive vampire followed by cheating out an aggressive vampire. You want to use these blood tokens and Strefan's second ability to the best of your advantage. Your mana is extremely valuable and you don't need to dump your entire hand out because you're just asking to get board wiped. Instead, you want to try to target down the players that need to be targeted, and you want to play a smooth game plan. A lot of people typically think aggro, I need to go as fast as possible. But just like my video talking about grinding in EDH, sometimes smooth is the fastest way to go. And how can you be smooth? By not dumping your hand and basically asking and begging interaction to come your way. Instead, if you're just playing at a decent pace, with 1 to 2 threats coming out every turn, playing the removal to help out your opponents, while also dealing plenty of damage, you're going to be in a good spot, and I would still consider it an aggro list. Now, of course, because you are an aggro list, there are some times you're just going to get targeted, and you have to be okay with that. You're not going to win every game with a combat-based, low protection strategy. But if you play your cards right and you play smart, this deck is really good. Now, the third and final lesson I learned was about card value. Now, by card value, I don't mean the actual monetary value of these cards. I really mean how synergistic these cards are to your strategy. Can a card offer multiple functions for your deck? Let's look at a card like Vein Ripper. Vein Ripper is a crazy piece on the battlefield. It's a 6/5 with flying and a ward cost of having to sacrifice a creature. This is a really good attacker in your list. If you get a couple of lords out, it's a very big creature that's hard to interact with on its own. But not only that, it provides a steady piece of life gain and life drain on my opponents. When I'm organizing this card, this is a card that's easy to cheat out. It's also a card that gets me life gain, and it's a good attacker. This could fall into a ton of different categories in my actual deck. Let's look at another card like Stormfist Crusader. Stormfist Crusader gets me 2 of my categories done. It helps me whittle down the board with damage, which means it also procs Strefan. And on top of that, it helps me draw through my deck just a little bit more. Now, yes, it does give my opponents extra cards as well, but I think that's a risk I'm willing to take, as I know that the card quality in my deck is a lot higher than some of theirs. The third lesson really is all about how well does a card fit in the deck itself. Now, of course, as Magic players, we can look at a card and see if it's good or not. Something like a Rhystic Study is obvious as to why it's so great. The trick is looking at the context around the card. For something like Rhystic, it probably does go into every single blue deck, but not every card is going to look like this. There are some cards in my deck already that if I were going in any different direction, it actually wouldn't work too well in my deck. But because I'm focused on life gain and aggro, they end up being great choices. So the third lesson is card quality matters, and the cards need to be able to perform multiple functions. So far, I've been having a blast playing this deck again, and I'm really looking forward to see how it might evolve in the future. I've only had it for about a week and a half now, but I've played a couple games with it and it's pretty great. And I'm enjoying playing such a familiar face in Strefan. I urge all of you to look at commanders that you may have had in the past, that you may have deconstructed, that you might have a little itch of rebuilding. And I'm here to tell you that you should rebuild them. You liked them enough in the first place to build them once. I'm sure you can find a way to build them again. Now, if you want to play against me with a deck like this, you can check out the Patreon in the link in my description, which will give you access to my Discord, where we play spell table games. And we just chat it up like a normal community. If that interests you, go check it out in the link in my description. And if you guys enjoyed this content, please feel free to like and subscribe. I want to thank all my patrons right there. You have all brought me so much great support, and it's really been a joy to see you guys review some of your decks and just be able to get to know you guys a little bit better. So thank you all so much for your support. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all next time.